On this episode of the Roots and Reflections podcast, I sit down with eLIMBS founder and my former boss, Phil Coyner. eLIMBS, which has since been acquired by DMSi, was one of the industry-leading providers of hardwood inventory software. Over the course of nearly 18 years, Phil and his wife, Amy, built a business that changed the way the hardwood industry looked at software and ultimately became staples at all of the industry trade shows and annual events. Our conversation touches on Phil's start in software and his chance introduction to the hardwood industry, the lessons he learned along the way, what he is most proud of in his career, and what's on the horizon. Now sit back and enjoy my conversation with Phil Coyner. Hey, Phil. Thanks for joining me today on the Roots and Reflections podcast. You and I go way back to, I think, 2009 when I was an intern with eLIMBS. So I'm happy to have you on the show. But let's start out with, we'll start from the beginning. What was it like growing up in Belpre, Ohio?
I grew up in a small town. I think we're a 6,000 person town. Got older sister, older brother, younger sister, mom, dad. Um, Grew up in a 1,200 square foot house, just a little old place and a little old neighborhood and tiny little town in Appalachia, West Virginia. Um, didn't see much of dad in the early days. He was a traveling chemist, worked for Cameron back then, and then Borg Warner. And then somewhere in the mid 80s, he started a company locally, and it was a environmental laboratory sort of focused on certification process for air and water testing laboratories. And that's a whole long story, but generally, just a small town kid, pretty normal.
So growing up in Southeast Ohio, it's kind of out there in the woods. Did you spend a lot of time in the woods growing up?
Yeah, we pretty much left when we got up in the morning and came back home whenever we heard mom yelling on the porch that it was time for dinner. Mom cooked dinner 7 nights a week, and it was something you weren't late for and you didn't miss.
Gotcha. So tell me about your college days. I know you sort of have an interesting story behind your college career. You started kind of going one direction and then switched part of the way through. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I went a couple different ways. I was sort of destined to be an aerospace engineer originally and ended up at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University back in '92. Spent 3 years down there. It was in Daytona Beach, which I think I spent more time surfing than I did in school, but just sort of the way it was. But while I was down there, I actually worked in the IT department at the college and then also a bungee bunch boardwalk. But back in '95, there were no wars. Therefore, there were no jobs in aerospace engineering. They weren't, massively dumping into the aerospace industry. And I saw everybody I knew graduating that had to go to grad school to get jobs. And I didn't want to keep going to school and, go to an extended degree and stuff. So I ended up actually transferring out of there in '95 to University of Dayton and went into management information systems. So I was at work at school, liked it better than I did school in the aerospace engineering side, and just kind of decided to go into that industry professionally.
So working in MIS, did you know that you wanted to kind of go the software route or the development route? How
Oh,
did you land on that?
quite the opposite, actually. But in the final interviews for the two jobs we were looking at, the two you wanted were Anderson Consulting back then and Procter and Gamble. And of course, part of the Enter Consulting gig was you had to be a developer for the first year. That was part of the track, when I was coming out. And I was the only guy who didn't get the job offer at Anderson Consulting. And when I came back and saw the other guys and they had gotten their offers, they're like, "Well, what'd you say in the interview?" I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, did you talk about, being a developer and stuff?" I said, "Oh yeah, I would never wanted to do that." I said, "That was one thing I definitely didn't want to do." And Mark looked at me and kind of said, "Well, maybe that's why you didn't get the job offer, since it was a condition of employment." So, no, it was quite the opposite. I swear I would never write code. It wasn't, I didn't go into computer science. I went into management information systems for a reason. I wanted to be a tech guy, but I didn't want to be a coder. That just happened.
It's funny how you fall into different things, right?
Yeah, yeah. I blame dad for that.
So you started your career at Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati. Tell me more about that experience.
Yeah, so I came in, they call it the TSG. It stood for the Technical Support Group, but we handled the 5,000 US salespeople in in the country that worked for Procter and Gamble in all sides and all areas of their markets. And we were hired in as the managers of the group. We had some contractors. We worked two shifts, so we ran from I think 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. But part of the gig and the way it was set up was all of the managers became part of a development team, with one of the systems that the company used. And I ended up specialized in, back then it was high tech, but it was CC mail. It was email. It was really the beginning of email was about that time. That's when it really started being used. And so I ended up on the actual electronic communication team, and then also on the pharmaceutical sales reps team. So I worked with something called Extreme Territory Management, which was a software package built by an outside company, but I became the Procter and Gamble resource that was worked directly with the developers, and then also directly with pharmaceutical sales reps to sort of manage, modify, wish list, and then handle the in between them.
So looking back on that experience, that's obviously very different than the role you had long term in the hardwood industry and with eLIMBS. What do you think that you took away from that experience? From learning experiences that you carried forward.
Certainly the support side of things. It was a really structured and formal support model. Especially for back then, we didn't have the kind of systems we have these days. We didn't have support tracking systems. We were building these things actually as the tech support group guys, on the side, trying to build a knowledge-based software and, all kinds of things. We were building it in Lotus Notes and VB6, and everybody was trying to do something different to sort of do that. So part of it was really, formalizing and structuring that support process. But again, at Procter and Gamble back then, they were really the top of the market, both as a place to work, as a service company, and every part and every individual segment of that business really tried to operate at just top tiers. So they really focused on service. Our customers were the salespeople. And it just sort of came out of that with a new appreciation of tech support. It was something that, it's a nasty word for any tech person to think that you're going to work in tech support. But we all worked the bench, and we did do tech support. But as the managers, that really wasn't our job. That was our learning, to understand what it was like, how you did it, things you ran into, and then to really manage the process to improve that and really build out a better solution for providing tech support. Most of our staff were actual contractors that were provided, but we all had to work at least a 3 to 4 hour shift every day, in the actual support area. So a lot of our quality of service and focus on sort of standardizing and, really building out a system and solution that provided those kind of services came from the Procter and Gamble mentality.
Yeah, and that was something that, that was always instilled in everyone at eLIMBS. I can remember from our days there, is support first, right? You live and die by that. So
number one priority is support. Everybody says it's sales, but at eLIMBS, it's support.
So, the next stop in your career was going back to work with the family business. Tell me more about that. How did you end up there? And what did you do while you were there?
Well, 9 months after we bought our first house, I got a phone call from Dad. That phone call essentially was, "Hey, I need you to come back and help." Long story short, essentially, his market got deregulated by the EPA. And it was very tightly controlled before that. And it was sort of the EPA provided all these samples and stuff that they ended up offering. They privatized at that point. So he called actually because he needed help at the time. Again, Dad was really he was a bench chemist. That's what he called himself. He liked being in the lab. At this point, his company was 30 or 40 people, good size operation. And he had written all the software that ran the entire business himself. And again, this guy typed with 2 fingers. So it was painful to watch him write software because it took 3 days for him to write, 12 lines of code. But he called me to come back to manage 2 sides of it. One is, of course, the IT side, and then sort of step into the role of taking over the tech and the software and stuff like that. At that point, I hadn't planned on writing the software, but that ended up being the case. But also to manage what we call the PT program. It's a proficiency testing program. And it's essentially just a blind sample testing program where essentially Dad's company manufactured fake polluted samples, sent them out to laboratories. They tested them to prove they could test polluted samples accurately, reported back what they thought. And then there was a big statistical analysis with by weight mean calculations and stuff that removed outliers and actually generated the pass-fail criteria. There was no technical pass fail other than as determined by the laboratories who participated in the studies. So his software, the software that was in the business, of course, there was nothing that fit this market. And it was all built at that point in something called R-base, which essentially is a D-base variation. The old green screen, black screen, just number menu systems, no graphic interface kind of situation. So I came back to help with the deregulation and help handle the opportunity that was coming.
So, like you said, you built software that didn't exist, right? You had a
Yep.
need for something that wasn't really out there, and for my time working with you, you always mentioned how that was the big differentiating factor for that business. That's what made you guys really stand out, was the software. It wasn't so much the creation of the test samples; it was the back end software and the value and the service that you were able to provide. Um, is that something that you personally identified, that you as a team identified, and how did you kind of go from that realization that there was the need there to building out that software? Was that something that happened quickly, or was that a long process?
Well, again, Dad had built the bare bones data management and reporting piece of it in this R-based system back in the day, and the statistical analysis and process that handled all that. And this thing, literally, when we ran the statistics, it was a monthly program, so there'd be 300, 400, 500 labs that ran samples and tested, I don't know, 600 compounds maybe, and reported this in the whole statistical analysis and outlier calculations and stuff. When he ran this in the R-base, it would take 12 hours to process, as far as actually doing the math and analysis and all that. And then they had to actually generate the reports, because their actual product was the report. It's about the performance, how they compare to the other laboratories, and helping them identify. It's a quality control process. Is really what it comes down to. It's getting closer and closer to the actual numbers and improving as they go. So the reporting was a key part of this product. And back in the R-base system, they were running dot matrix printers that were literally running for 4 days straight, printing out these reports for customers. So the base sort of software and need for it, Dad had already sort of conquered that animal and was doing it better than everybody else. But it was at one of those points in time. This was '99. So there was a technology shift, and it had been out long enough. At this point, I think Visual Basic 3 was out, and it was just going to Visual Basic 4. When I came in, you were starting to get real sort of like SQL Server. It really hit hard with a solid version in 2000, and things like that. So it was really a change in sort of the ability to run enterprise level databases on a small company scale and budget. So what we did was essentially we started with that proficiency testing management system, statistical analysis and data entry, and all that kind of stuff, and sort of replicated the system he had, but in the Visual Basic world with graphical interface. And again, and I'm a self-taught hack as a developer. I never had a class. I just had books and Dad, and we just went as we went. We originally wrote this system on Microsoft Access, which we were crushing a 2 gig database and having to compact the thing twice a day to keep it from dying. But we focused originally on that piece of the business. It's sort of building that out, building it better, and then, believe it or not, the big goal was color reporting, because again, these were, oh geez, I don't know what we printed. Probably 20,000 pages that we had 3 or 4 days to print and get out the door. And back then, color printers were expensive. Laser color jets were slower than snot. I mean, they print 2 or 3 pages a minute. So we would have needed 20 of them. So just starting with the software that gave us sort of that graphical capability, building that out, and then moving honestly into solving the printing problem, which ended up being a $74,000 printer that was designed for a printing press company. And it was like 18 feet long. But from there, we took it into the rest of the business. At that point, I had kind of become a software developer. We had built out, we had replaced all Dad's systems, on the proficiency testing systems, and so on. And we started moving into the rest of the business. So we started looking at, orders and invoicing and billing and, all the normal kind of business operation stuff. And so that was sort of my first foray into writing software for that. And that was a new animal for both Dad and I. He had been running this business for, at this point, 20 some years, but neither of us have ever built software that sort of manage that kind of stuff, and just all the challenges associated with, once you send an invoice out to a customer, you need to have a copy of what that was exactly as it was in your data set. You can't have somebody go in and change it and not be able to reproduce it. Those kind of things you get burnt by as a new guy. And again, there wasn't a lot of custom software in the world back then. It was sort of, there wasn't the kind of development support, and obviously we didn't have the internet and these bulletin boards and all these resources that we could go to. So it was literally just, you met a couple people, you talked to them about things, you worked with the people you knew, which was always just a handful at best, and you kind of did what you did, and it just ended up working out really well.
So fast forward, tell me how you got from, a burgeoning software developer at a family business to starting your first company.
Well, we built a package for the state agencies that was meant to track the certifications of the laboratories in the states, and we were giving it away for free out of APG, Dad's company. Um, and it was intentional. It was to build better relationships with the state agencies. And although government agencies can't recommend vendors, you know, you can hear it in their voice. So we actually built the system and started giving it out to state agencies, and actually ended up with, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 states that were actually running this piece of software. And part of it was, it became not quite a full-time gig, but it became a pretty serious part of my job, building and expanding that system, because it really did get some traction. And then also the competitors started complaining. And the plan always was is that, once Dad sort of got caught up, got the business back under control, that I would actually go out into and, spin off a custom software company. And this was just the time and the opportunity to do it. We started off with this system that we were giving away for free. We split the company just to sort of, not because we had to with the competitive situation, but just because it was a good time to do it. And then we started actually charging for the system and selling it to the state agencies. And that was our original software package.
So this is where I think it starts to get really interesting, especially for the hardwood industry. Tell me how you went from doing water treatment testing software, and how you kind of got from there to your introduction to the hardwood industry.
Yeah, so when we spun off, we were just a hardcore custom software company. We ran under the name of IT Toolworks, started in Marietta, Ohio, which is just 10 minutes down the road from us, 15 minutes down the road from us. Um, and we just did everything. We went to the Chamber of Commerce meetings, we joined all the business development groups, we got involved with the colleges and, all the entrepreneur programs and things like that. And we just took any project we could get. We did everything from building a point of sale system for the dry cleaner in downtown Marietta with the little tickets that get attached to the clothes, and cash register drawers popping open when you hit the buttons, and, dealing with change and that kind of stuff, to a pilot project for the U.S. Navy to track weapons shipment and monitor environmental conditions and controllers to see if there was, massive vibration, or if doors were open, while a shipment was being transferred, so they knew everything was hijacked, and, stuff like that. We did a third-party moving services system for a company out of DC that essentially had a network of 6,000 vendors around the country that sent them out ahead of moving companies coming in to pack unique things, high value art, chandeliers, pool tables, So we just took everything we got. And then one day, Amy, my wife, who ended up running the company in the end, actually bumped into a hardwood mill at a local Chamber of Commerce meeting, and it was Hazy Hardwoods just outside Marietta. They were unhappy with what was available in the market. They were kind of committed to the community, small town people, keep your money here kind of people. And they reached out and they gave us a shot. So we ended up doing a lumber inventory system, just bare bones, no money, no invoicing, just the basics of the operation of, from purchase production out of the sawmill all the way through kiln drying, and, all the way through to the point of shipment and stopping there. And I actually wasn't even involved in the project the first couple of years. A couple of the guys that worked for me handled it, and I picked it up about a year and a half or 2 years in. But we just tripped and fell and ended up in the hardwood market. It is sort of how it happened. From there, later it was a choice. They talked to another local mill, whether it was Blaney Hardwoods or Superior Hardwoods. I don't remember the order of the first three, but the first three were Hazley Hardwoods, Superior Hardwoods of Ohio, and then Blaney Hardwoods. And now Superior Hardwoods of Ohio actually owns the Blaney Hardwoods location that we started with. But we originally built the handheld systems for Blaney hardwoods. That was a foray into a complete unknown, and it was just trial by fire. We spent a lot of time in the yards, actually learning and just being completely confused the whole time. I mean, there's so many weird terms and knowledge and things that go on in the yards that are just you just don't know about unless you're there. Unless you get into this market. So that's sort of how we tripped and fell into it.
So before we move on, because I know this is a really funny story, tell me about what you wore to your first time going on site at a hardwood mill.
Oh, you're talking. That wasn't the first time. That was the first time I got taught what not to wear. Yeah, we were up in the MacArthur area, and it's something Brothers. I don't remember the actual name of the company, but I called him a few years later when I realized what happened. When we first looked at identifying a market to actually go into and target a specific market, we looked at the hardware market, the trucking industry, electronic medical records, and one other I can't remember. But there were 249 competitors in the electronic medical records. There was 170 in the trucking industry, and there were 13 in the hardwood industry, and they all were selling 20-year-old stuff. So we picked this market, and we worked with the Ohio University, an entrepreneurial program up there, who did some market research for us and stuff, and really identified it as a good choice. And so what we did initially was I had a friend who was a Xerox sales rep. He ran a Xerox place. And in the old days, I know a lot of you will know about the original Xerox sales training being just legendary. And so he agreed to go out with me for 2 weeks and just go really see what the opportunity was. Just go out, hit some hardwood operations, talk to them, tell them what we've done at Blaney and Superior and, Hazley. And so we did that, and we spent 2 weeks out there. And, of course, we were in khakis and dress shoes and polo shirts, essentially, and showed up at a lumber yard. And again, we had a lumber inventory system, and we're in the process of building lumber handhelds. We didn't have any log systems. We didn't have any log software. And we show up a rainy day at this place outside MacArthur. And the guy's like, yeah, well, nice to meet you. Let me take you around and show you what we got. Because, again, we had everybody take us on a tour because we were learning, and feeling out the market. And, he's like, well, let's start out in the log yard. And it's raining and muddy. And literally, we go walking through this log yard with 3 feet of mud, dress shoes and khakis. And, the whole time we're walking out through there, I'm looking at Mike saying, I don't know why we're touring the log yard. I'm like, we don't have any log system software. We don't, all we have is lumber. Like, he's like, maybe they just want to show us the yard. I'm like, okay. So, fast forward about 3 years after I've been doing this, and I've been in, I don't know, 50, 100, 200 yards at this point, who knows. I realized I was being taught a lesson about how to dress that day. You don't show up at a hardwood mill in dress shoes and khakis. If you do, you'll get a tour of the log yard in the rain. So I called him, and I said, hey, remember when we came out a few years ago? I now know why you took me on the tour of the log yard. He goes, refresh my memory. I said, Xerox sales guy from eLIMBS, dress shoes, khakis, and he just started laughing. He said, yep, now you know how not to dress when you show up at a hardwood mill.
So I think that story is actually a perfect segue. Obviously, you mentioned, doing sort of a market analysis, seeing how many competitors were out there, how many companies were out there. In addition, just to that kind of hard market data, what were the other, less tangible elements of the hardwood industry that made it really attractive for you guys?
Well, for one, it's all family businesses. I mean, there are some corporate presence, here and there. There's some big operations, but for the most part, these are third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation family businesses. They're just hardworking people that were in a market that was completely underserved from technology standpoint. I mean, what they had to choose from out in the market was just dreadful, especially for what they were paying for it. Did so little for them, and they were just good, honest people. I mean, we used to show up, and again, we just went around and stopped by places and introduced ourselves. And we weren't trying to sell anything. We didn't even know if we had anything worse, that they wanted. So, we would stop at these places and just ask them to take us on a tour, show us around, just introduce themselves, let them know we were around if they ever needed anything. And it was amazing how many times that, we called him the old guy at the place, the current patriarch, would say before we left would be like, hold on, come here and sit down, and he'd sit down and they'd grab whatever member directory of whatever organizations they were part of, whether it was the Ohio Forestry, whether it was NHLA, whether it was the IHLA, and they would sit down and they would go through these books and they would mark the people that we should go see and that we should call, or that they knew had a need for what we were doing, or that just simply respected them enough to give us an opportunity. And they would even call ahead when we went. Like, I mean, it was just an amazing thing. These people just met us. We just walked in the door, just introduced ourselves. But because we showed up, because we were local, probably because we were in jeans and boots this time, yeah, they took the time out of their day to help us new guys who didn't know anything really, even what we thought we knew, we didn't know for the most part, start off and be successful. It's all the way up until probably at least 2016, easily 2018. We were doing $250,000 deals on a handshake. You know, not signed contracts. Every now and then we would sign one. We always said we were going to sign one. We only probably signed 50% of them at best, even 18 on. It just, if they said they would pay, they would pay. If we said we would do, we would do. And it was just accepted that that was the agreement. And it was just a fantastic place to work. I mean, you just don't have industries like that anymore, where you get that kind of support, where you get, I mean, the opportunity to literally show up essentially on a sales visit and have them sit down and help you sell to other people when they just met you. I mean, it was mind blowing to me, and it's the reason why we spent our lives in this industry and put so much into it. I mean, they're just great people, and we've got more friends that started as customers than we've got friends that aren't customers. Our closest friends are customers. It's just the way it is.
So that's, sort of the origin story of eLIMBS. You decided to spin off a company specifically for the hardwood industry. What were some of the early challenges you faced as eLIMBS, as in the infancy of that company, and how did that sort of shape the way the company grew and you grew, as a member of the industry?
Well, the first challenge was not realizing that a handheld had to run independent of the computer system. I mean, we literally sold a handheld to an Amish mill up in Ohio. Melvin Raver is Raver Lumber, one of the Walnut Creek and Raver Lumber. But Raver Lumber specifically was the one we sold a handheld to. And at the time, everything was set up on a computer, downloaded to the handheld. You added species, you added grades, you added thicknesses. You had to have the computer to download it back to generate reports and, all these things. And so that was just a big oversight that we didn't realize handhelds were this standalone thing that went out in the world and operated on their own. Had to be able to print, had to be able to print checks, had to print reports, had to be able to add and edit things, had to be able to add pricing, add species, change calculation factors on thicknesses and all these craziness. So that was a disaster with the first handheld sale. But the funniest part of the first handheld sale was I literally showed up to train the guy at his house. And I'd never been to an Amish person's house. And again, never trained anybody on a handheld other than Blaney Hardwoods, which was down the road from my house. So I could drive down there 15 times in a day and come back if I needed to. But I showed up and I literally parked my truck beside the buggy in the driveway. And I walked up, knocked on the door, and walked inside. And this was Melvin Raber, younger Melvin, the grader. But walked inside, and there literally was probably 8 or 9 kids sitting around the dining room table, which was under gas lights. They had made homemade donuts. And I'm sitting here with this handheld computer, training them how to run this computer under these gas lights, surrounded by full garb, Amish children at this table, all who were interested in paying attention and giggling, laughing, and having a good time. But that alone was unique to me. I never even conceived of the fact that I was going to have a handheld sold, not to mention I had already sold one at this point, to people who didn't have computers, didn't have internet, had no concept of how to even begin to use something electronic like this. And it was just a really interesting challenge. It sort of set the stage for the future to come, which ultimately the hardwood market wasn't a whole lot different. They were so tech starved, and again, we didn't have mobile phones and things like that, so not everybody was familiar with this kind of stuff. But the whole market ended up kind of being like that. It was very just not tech savvy in any capacity. I mean, that's the understatement of the century, probably. I mean, most of these people didn't have computers at their houses. A lot of the yards didn't have computers in them. They literally had fax machines.
So is that sort of what shaped, the spirit and the ethos of eLIMBS, is that it is for hardwoods by, for hardwood guys by hardwood guys, right? And that you really have to, I know one of the first things we always did as new employees at eLIMBS was, a grading short course. Like, it's really the foundation of understanding the industry. Is that kind of what shaped that mentality?
Yeah, I used to say it, and it wasn't a tagline. It was just a response to a question when people asked me, sort of, what do you do? How do you make money? Where do you make your money? And my answer was always very just blatantly, we make all our money in the yard. It was just an answer to a question, and later it kind of became a tagline, not intentionally. It was true though, is that what we did different from all the other vendors was we spent all day, every day in the yard with the guys running handhelds. We originally built our brand on the handhelds, on the quality of the handhelds, on the capability of the handhelds, and on expanded use of the handhelds. When I came into the market, they were used for three things: end tally, chain tally, and block tally. That was it. That's all they were used for, and they just barely did that, and everybody hated them. They were just a necessary evil. I mean, most of the programs looked like an Excel sheet that, and they took 3 minutes to change from a 9-foot length to a 10-foot length before they could start end tallying again. It took them longer to switch a length on a tally pack than it did to tally the whole pack. So, what we really focused on, again, partially because of those early experiences with Melvin, who was Amish and not familiar with computers, was ease of use, simplicity. Obviously there's a balance of flexibility and simplicity that, counteract each other. But the end user doesn't have to know. So we really committed to building not just the best systems out there, but the best systems that were so easy to use, you really didn't even need any training to do it. Now, did we ever get to the point where you needed zero training? Probably a couple times, in a couple places where you had a handier guy. But our training used to consist of, for a chain tally operation, which is by far the most complex thing, out there on a handheld. We used to spend 2 or 3 hours on the phone with a guy, and he would have a handout and we had a handout in our hand. We didn't have remote support. We couldn't share screens. We did this over the phone. They held one, we held one in our office, and, we got a couple of calls a couple of days after that, and, we went from there, and it went on. But we learned very early on that, what the challenges with the competitors had, from as simple as, battery life and buying sort of lower quality devices that broke, to things like losing loads. I mean, you want to get yelled at by a hardwood guy and find out what a hardwood guy is really like. Lose one of his loads, whether a load they just bought and chain tallied, whether it was a load of logs. Well, that's not something you want to experience. So, we learned very early on to essentially make our systems perfect. I mean, did we have bugs occasionally? Sure. But did we have problems like most of the market had? No. I mean, we just took a completely different avenues towards an approach towards the quality of our systems. Again, it went back to the support thing from Procter and Gamble. The only difference now is I was actually building at least most of the systems and the code at this point. So every single time the phone rang, it meant I failed. It's something that as a developer, if you do your own support, it's kind of crushing, in all honesty. Like it sort of breaks your soul because you're the reason that it failed. You didn't do it right. Now, regardless of the fact that you may be able to say, well, you can't put letters in a numeric box. It's trying to do math, so it broke. Again, a lot of the software companies out there, I mean, support guys have done it to me before. Blame me for their system breaking because I put something in a box I shouldn't be able to put in the box to begin with. And that's the approach we took to everything. Was even if you could break something we built, even if you were trying to break it, we failed to do our jobs well. We should make it so you cannot break it, and you can only do it right. And it tells you when you do something wrong, and that was the entire mentality behind our company and our service and our software. mean, I'm sure you experienced it, as the support guy, and in becoming a developer. We were just there was zero tolerance for failure. Like it wasn't acceptable, especially in the handheld side of things. Whether it was the hardware that broke because you bought and sold cheap hardware like some of the competitors do, or whether it was the software that didn't work, the guy in the yard doesn't care. It doesn't work.
Oh yeah, you learn that lesson quickly in support. If you try to tell someone in a yard what they did wrong and why they broke it,
Yeah,
like yeah, you learn quickly that
doesn't go
doesn't
over
matter.
well. No.
So, eLIMBS, I know early on you were the handheld guys, right? And you sort of started, and that's where you really planted your flag in the industry was on the handheld side. How did, your growth over, as you look over the 10, 15, 20, almost 20 years, as the company grew, did you go from expanding from handhelds to inventory systems and then branching out into different areas of the production process from logs, going back to timber? And how did that sort of flow? I know the business kind of ebbed and flowed, but from the days of working in the basement office somewhere to, having a full office and a big team. Tell me about that, just sort of that growth story.
Yeah, so again, we sort of again we had the lumber inventory system, which we were still building out at this point, and we kind of we targeted a very specific market with that. We stayed out of money. That was our thing. We didn't take orders. We didn't do invoicing. We did everything else. From whether purchasing, receiving, sawmill production, all the way through. We didn't handle the log yards. We didn't handle log buying, timber, anything like that at this point. So this was still probably all the way up till sort of around 2008 is where we started getting into logs. But, um, we had planted our flag and focused on this handheld side of things. And it's because it was necessary initially. We couldn't go further into the hardwood market without the handhelds. And then, of course, everything we did, we wanted to do better and more. And we just kept finding more and more opportunities for using the handhelds, from purchasing to receiving to loading kilns to consuming lumber to shipping to allocating to orders, to all kinds of things that the competitors did do with handhelds. But actually, how we grew and how our systems really became so much better than everybody else's in the industry. It's a little funny in that we ended up becoming partners with the competitors, and what we call later competitors. We ended up being partners with because a lot of the companies, the majority of the companies that serve this market, is still now less so then. There were some more hardwood guys out there then. Were out of the softwood side of the industry, and they built softwood systems and they sort of had adapted them kind of to work with hardwoods as best they could. Um, there were a few like logical systems, which eventually became part of eLIMBS. We purchased them, and Log Pro, and there was a few other in the old days. I don't remember the name of Excalibur. The old companies that were hardwood actually built hardwoods like we were. That's the market they served. That's where they stayed. They stayed on the east side of the Mississippi, just like we did. But we became partners with all these competitors essentially, from Progressive Systems, PSI, then now it's Epicor out of Vancouver. It was ISIS then, now it's Miltech out of Vancouver also. Um, Three Log and a few others. But what would happen is we became partners, provided the handheld systems, and we built what we called then an intelligence. It was eLIMBS Intelligence. It was the middleman between the inventory and production systems and the handhelds that handled all the up and down, the transfers and species sync and thicknesses sync, and the production that came off the handhelds and received loads and all that went into the inventory systems and production systems. And what happened was in places we went during implementations, we spent a lot of time on site because when we sold with the partner systems, they were typically big multi-location deals, lots of handhelds. So we spent a lot of time on site, and invariably, topics would come up. Purchase receiving inspection, one of the pieces of the eLIMBS software that just nearly legendary in what it does and how good it is and how there's nothing else out there to this day like it. It came from one of these scenarios where we're sitting at Coastal, the other partner companies are there, and they're like, well, how are we going to handle this? And they talk about it, and well, the inventory system doesn't have a way to do it. Well, and the question still stands: how are we going to handle this? Where are we going to do this? And I would just put my hand up and I said, I'll do it. And this would happen again, from receiving on the handhelds, we built it out at Coastal, and that's in this way. The receiving system in the actual eLIMBS software system got built this way. And then the inspection and grading system got built the same way, tying into the sorters to pull data when the handhelds weren't grading. And, every time it was, well, how are we going to handle this? And it was eLIMBS going, we'll do it. And, we would literally work 50 hours over a weekend and come back in that Monday and have a prototype of it that sort of worked, but mostly was there to say, okay, did we get it right? Are we close? What else do we need to do? And, we literally just worked through the process. We literally lived in the yards. I mean, back in these days, I was diamond, platinum, whatever, preferred in 3 hotel chains, at a time. Like I literally spent 200 plus nights a year in hotels, and everybody that worked with me did the same. It was just, we went on site with the customers. We worked on site with the customers. We did a lot of our development on site with the customers, especially the new stuff, so that we could go in the next day and sit down with them and really say, okay, what do we get? What do we miss? What do we understand? What do we not? What else do we need to do? How's the flow? Don't worry about the bugs. We'll sort that out. We wrote it in 50 hours over the weekend. Yeah. And that's how our systems got built. That's how our lumber side of the operation got so much better than everything out there. We literally were the guys that just put our hands up every time the competitor system didn't do something and offered to do it. Now, did we come in 250% over budget a lot of projects? Yeah, that happened more than once. I think 400% at least once. But we were just doing what we were asked to, and again, it wasn't ever really an issue because we were OCD about documentation with that stuff too. But that's where it came from, and somewhere we really stayed out of the timber and log operations for as long as we could, and finally just had to do it. We had become pretty well known on the lumber side and sort of the production systems, and again, we're starting to build a real significantly sort of quality reputation on that side of the systems. But to get the full business of an operation, to get the full business of a big multi-location operation, we needed the second half of the business. We could sell one system to them, and then we were integrating with, again, partners, competitors, whatever you want to call them, on the timber and log side of the system. Then we were seeing the same things there that we were seeing on the lumber side when we first started, which was, most of these systems were still running on like DBase and Progress and, oh gosh, what else? Fox Pro, and this is 2008 we're talking about. So they were built on 40-year-old technology, 30-year-old technology at this point that they were selling for premium. So we decided to do it, and we jumped into that side next. And we started with the log side and the log handheld, and we focused solely on tagged log systems because it's just as a process and sort of software standpoint, it's much more straightforward. Every item's a single entity, it's trackable, so it limited our potential sales. But again, we understood at this point, we had already learned the hard way for the first 10 years, even 5 years in, we were still complete idiots as far as lumber went. And, just finally figured out really what a lumber operation was like, a sawmill was like, and a concentration yard was like. So we were prepared for it going into the timber and log side. We sort of eased into it. So we targeted real specifically tag log operations. And, we went after existing customers. We had ones that offered us the business before, and we had turned it down, saying, no, we're still buried in this lumber expansion systems growth and, understanding all that. Go with somebody else for now, and we'll reach out when the time comes that we're ready. And so that's what we did. And we started walking through, working through that. And again, same thing happened. I remember at Taylor Lumber, again, one of the partner systems who didn't offer handhelds, we were providing log handhelds to. We always have this intermediary software, and in that intermediary software, again, we call it intelligence system. We built in the pieces of the system that the competitor system didn't have, that these people needed it, and they said, well, how are we going to do this? We put our hand up. So, in Taylor, we walked in, and the guys at the log yard in the main office is just sweating bullets one day. And there's a truck driver standing there just yelling at him. And this goes on for like 40 minutes. And he finally leaves. And the guy's name was actually Phil. I said, Phil, what was that about? He goes, he just wanted his check. I said, what do you mean? He's like, I was just printing his check. I'm like, for 45 minutes, you were just printing his check? He's like, yeah, that's how long it takes me to create a check in this new system we got. And I said, oh gosh. I said, so that happened every time? He goes, yeah, those guys are not patient. Truckers are a unique breed. Yeah, loggers are a unique breed. So again, I said, well, and I actually said to him, I said, what if I put my hand up and say I can make it so you can write a check in 10 minutes? I'm like, you're doing the tally on my handouts. It has the prices on the handouts. You generate the tally report from my handout. It's got freight, whether it's add, deduct. I'm like, why don't we just print the check from the handout or the intelligence system? And he's like, oh, would you do that? I said, yeah. And so I came in tomorrow and we printed checks from eLIMBS from then on, and this guy's nightmare went away. So again, it was, these kind of little things that we built pieces of the system, and where there were opportunities when we were working with competitors and their system didn't do something well, didn't do it at all. We just followed that same process. Now, granted, all of our partner companies eventually just became competitors because everybody started saying, well, why don't we just buy your stuff? And the only answer we had was, well, because we were brought into the deal by them, and you can't. We can't let you. But it's a good question. So, we went through the log side, did that with the tag logs, and then expanded into the timber contract operations, which is where the real chaos comes in. The just almost no standard rules, all kinds of constant exceptions to rules. And again, you struggle with the same kind of stuff. You're trying to build a system that handles sort of this non-structured, sort of structured, sometimes structured, but always a lot of exceptions that don't make any sense with any of the rules kind of system. And in the early days, you try and build the system, and you try and make it to where it handles all of that stuff. After you've been in the market for 15 years or so, you finally realize if you just look at the customer you're talking to and say, well, how many times a year do you do that? 2, 3, 4 times. Well, how hard would it be for you to track that in Excel? Well, that'd be easy. And we were looking at a 150-hour custom development project to solve this problem for something that would take them 15 minutes 3 times a year. So that sort of is the ultimate challenge with software, and what you find with sort of the hardware market, where it's full of exceptions like this. I mean, random length. What you buy is not what you get. If you buy 10,000 feet and get 11,000 feet, you might still be pissed because it's off grade. If you buy 9,000 feet and get 6,000 feet, you might be thrilled because it's all up over grade. It's this crazy sort of market where things don't add up. They don't have to add up, and whether they go plus or minus doesn't necessarily mean you're happy or sad. And so you have to find this balance with software of the capability, the flexibility to do almost anything, though, not everything. And then an understanding of when to say, you know what, you do this for one guy once a year, one guy 6 times a year. It'll cost you, an extra $50,000 to do this in the system versus doing 98% of what you do in the system perfectly automated, saving literally half to 3/4 of your day, because that's what these people would save in the timber system. When we came in, the main office person handled timber contracts. And, this one thing, you've got all kinds of extra time to do. And they would just be like, oh, well, yeah, it's not worth 50 grand. In our younger days, we would have spent weeks and weeks and weeks building out this custom system to handle this really unique thing, thinking we're going to run into it again. And, that everybody probably does this sometimes. And, once you've been in 6, 7, 8, I don't even know how many yards, maybe 1,000 yards now these days that we've been in, you start to realize, one, you actually know what you might run into again because you've already been there. 2, what matters and what doesn't matter and what's worth the cost of building into a system. Because again, anything you add in to a system like that adds that kind of flexibility also adds complexity to use for everything else you do in the system. I mean, whether it's some weird payment type. Well, you got one more payment type to pick. Well, that one might have been mileage based, whereas everything else was either per thousand or per ton. Well, now you got another set of math, options that you got to look at, another calculational style you got to look at, and all kinds of things. So one little change can carry so far through these systems that it can be a massive hit on everything you do. So every timber contract you set up now, you might have to add one more dimension to every single combination you buy of species and grade on a timber contract. So whereas it was species grade price, well, now species grade price units. Well, then a species grade price units, vendor price vendor units, and it just keeps compounding. So finding that sort of balance of the sort of the perfect system of knock out, automate 95% of the operation while saving a ton of time doing it, and use some of that extra time you save to handle this 5% outside the system if you have to, and just put it in the system after the fact. Just don't try and, use some kind of automated routine to calculate a $10 holdback that you got to pay to the bank for the guy's dozer because he doesn't pay his bills, but you need that guy to keep his dozer because he's one of your loggers and you can't get another logger in this area because they're all busy or out of business. It's crazy stuff like that we were building software to track. So.
So a few years back, you and Amy sold eLIMBS to DMSi. So as you look back over the 18, 20 years that you built eLIMBS, that you worked in the industry, what are some of the things that you're really proud of?
Obviously the systems. In the end, we were charging so much more than everybody else, and it wasn't to charge them more. It was actually how we controlled the volume of our business. We were the premium system out there. We were 3 or 4 times the price of the competitors. And again, it wasn't a price point situation for us. It was just a way of managing the volume of our work because, again, we could have grown very rapidly, but as everybody knows, you try and grow very rapidly, your service quality falls, everything falls apart. You have to hire more people faster, they're less trained. You end up with sort of this 80-20 situation in a much more significant level than sort of when you're under 10 or 12 people, everybody matters, everybody's good, everybody contributes heart and soul, and they treat it like their own business. There's a point where you go across that where you start to get into this sort of corporation mentality, and you get the 40-hour guys that just come in and they're there for a job. They're not there to treat their customers like they're part of the ownership of this business, and it's sort of a different animal. So our systems were just leaps and bounds beyond everything in the market, and again, our customers can attest to that. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, it just is what it is. We spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, and again, a lot of time in the yard to make that true, and we just never stopped. Um, what I spent the last 5 years on really, and again, you were a huge part of this. I mean, you were the first one I did it with. You were on the first project we did it for, Prime Lumber. We looked at standardizing our delivery process and really building out what we eventually became to call the eLIMBS experience. So standardize the delivery, optimize the delivery, minimize wasted time, wasted dollars, wasted development work, and really build out a structured process for delivering our systems. The magic in the end was one simple thing: one weekly project call with everybody from the customer side and everybody from eLIMBS side. I think it became the rule. You never ever missed a project call. They didn't get canceled. They didn't get moved. They weren't tolerated if half the people showed up. That became the Bible and the control point. The most important thing I ever probably learned in my life was that, as far as business goes. But what really, in the end, that's what I was super proud of when we sold it, was how far we had come. And then again, you and I built this system out originally. And again, it was trial and error. But even the first one, that Prime, went fantastic. I mean, it went better than any system implementation project that we ever delivered, both in being on time or closer to on time than ever before, on budget, no big surprises. I think we had a couple little ones, some piece variation with shrinkage for overseas stuff, which we've run into before. And I think a couple invoice, maybe bill of lading reports that we had to adjust. I mean, those were kind of the only rush things I remember happened on that project. And we took that and we carried it forward, and we built out, a project management site, a real structured process, what to expect week to week to week. And really, again, one of the other biggest learnings that we sort of learned as part of that process was not to overload the client, to drag the project out intentionally. So our target commitment of the customer was only 2 or 3 hours a week. So we'd have a 30-minute to hour-long project call, and then 1 or 2 other people we'd expect maybe 2 or 3 hours of work from, each week. And, everybody always, when they buy the system, they want to roll it out now. Well, we need it. Can you get it done in 3 weeks? Well, we used to say yes, and we used to fast track it, and we used to just go all out. And then again, 3 months later, we're still getting phone calls where we're doing this report. We're doing a different bill of lading. We're doing a different order report because we didn't plan it. We didn't manage it well. And we let their apparent sense of urgency, which rarely is actually that urgent, drive a decision that hurt the whole project. And we learned to push back on that and say, well, could we do it quicker than this? Yeah, we do it quicker than this. And here's what's going to happen. And we would explain the story to them. We've done this a dozen times. We've agreed to fast track something, and here's what's going to happen. And if you truly need it because, the company was sold and they're taking your software and everything else, we can do this. Here's going to be the shortcomings on the day that we go live. Here's what's going to happen for the next 3 months after that. And we can plan for that and manage that. You just have to understand that it's going to be a little painful, but to go live and for the 3 months after compared to what it'll be like, the rest of your lives. So, building out that process, understanding those things, and really getting really, really good at not just, our software systems where, we didn't hardly reporting change, add a new report, add a few fields to report, a couple, new reports here and there. But for the most part, we didn't make system changes anymore. They were very mature systems. They were just so far beyond anything in the market. People just didn't even know what to ask for because they did everything they needed. That this was the one thing we could do better, and it's what we focused on. And in the end, I'm really proud of how successful we were. And again, you were key to that. You were the one I did it with.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an experience, and it's growth experience. And I think we learned a lot together. So what are you up to these days? What's next for you personally? Are you staying out of the industry? Or are you getting back in? What's on the horizon?
Well, I get that question a lot. My standard answer is right now I've got a non-compete. That expires January 2026. I'll be back in the hardwood market. There's no doubt about that. As far as what all I'm going to do in the hardwood market, I haven't entirely defined yet. Looking at some sort of doing emerging technologies, as well as looking at potentially doing a different variation of what we've done in the past. That's not set in stone yet. I definitely will continue working in the hardwood market though in the future. Again, it's where my experience is. It's what I'm really good at. There's probably not very many people who have been in as many yards and operations and sawmills and log yards as I have. Literally, just I don't know. It's got to be 1,000 by now that I've actually spent time in the yard itself. These days, I'm flying. I'm actually in the process. Getting some advanced pilot's license right now. I got my IFR check ride coming up, which stands for rating. I got my commercial rating right after that, and I'm going to get actually my certified flight instructor ticket here in the next couple months, actually, and teach people to fly in the meantime. So, but I definitely will be back in the hardwood market. I still see everybody at the shows. Again, my wife Amy is back in. She's working with Microtech, one of the industry leading scanner companies out there for sure. And so we're still at NHLA and IHLA and out at the trade shows, and we see everybody there and stay in touch.
Awesome. Well, it's definitely good seeing you at all the shows still these days. So, but thanks again for taking some time to talk with me today, and it's been a real pleasure.
Yep, thanks, Ben. Appreciate the time, man.